This Quoircast Podcast episode is brought to you by Heretic Happy Hour, whose tagline is burning questions, not people. Join hosts Sean DeJaw, December Rose, Dr. Reverend Katie Valentine, Keith Giles, and myself, Matthew J. DiStefano, for a happy hour filled with quality conversation, fine fellowship, and perhaps even a laugh or two. Unapologetically irreverent and crass, yet sometimes profound, we make sure to pull no punches and leave no stones unturned as we discuss the Christian faith. But listener, beware. There will assuredly be some serious sacred cow tipping. If that sounds like your cup of tea, or bourbon if that's your thing, head on over to heretichappyhour.com to stay up to date with us. And be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcast fix.
Western Christianity has spent the last 2,000 years telling everyone they're separated from God.
This is Not Church with John and Nat Turney.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the podcast. My name is Nat Turney. I am one of your hosts. You know what? You get two hosts on this show. I know some shows have four. I feel like that's overkill. Heretic Happy Hour. You know who you are. Four hosts. Come on, man. Look at you with your embarrassment of riches for hosts. I feel like two is more than enough oftentimes. And Jason, if you're listening, I think you don't need three, but hey.
Jeez,
I'm just going to throw shade. I'm going to throw shade on two better podcasts.
Two of our partners you've already thrown under the bus.
Hey, some people get ahead by being good. Some people by tearing others down. I feel like I've taken the second track. So,
all right, Trump Jr.
All right. Oh, you know what? Screw you, man. Anyway, the guy chirping on the other side of the microphone is my brother John. Say hi, John.
Hi, John.
All right, cool. At least some things are consistent. I love that. And this is the podcast we call This Is Not Church. We are joined today by our friend Jonathan Foster. We have a lot to talk about with Jonathan, but what I guess first and foremost, we want to talk about this dissertation that he's written that is becoming a book, the title of which is Theology of Consent, and it has to deal with mimetic theory, which I love and which John is scared of.
Yeah, I'm a little bit scared of. Yeah,
you give me that look like, oh man. But I tell you what, this is going to be a fascinating conversation. Jonathan is an awesome guy. He's written way more than one book, so this is just the latest in a string of really awesome pieces of writing from him. But I'm sure this is something he has spent an enormous amount of time on, and it's about to be released into the world. So, welcome to the podcast, Jonathan. What's up, man?
Hey, man, I'm doing good. Thank you so much for having me back. We got to chat a little bit a year ago or so. And
yeah, feels like yesterday.
We had a relatively good time, I thought. And
hey, relatively good. Good enough that a year later, we're like, hell yeah, come on.
Let's do it again.
I know we chatted about your dissertation a year ago because you were in the middle of writing it, or you were like, deep in the weeds of it. And for anyone who's ever written something like a dissertation, y'all know how much it can consume your life. I mean, this is not, writing just, this is a scholarly work. I assume this is going to be something that is that is well researched and has had to have had a lot of work put into it. So
yeah, you have to call me doctor. So in order for that to happen, you better put some work into it. So yeah.
So Dr. Foster, I assume by the time that this episode releases, you will have you already defended your dissertation?
I've already defended. I'm the real deal. Everything has been officially submitted.
Real deal.
And, so you are officially right now. So when we titled this, we have to say with Dr.
Jonathan Foster.
All right, so Doc, let's talk about this thing. If I can call you Doc.
Sure.
First of all, congratulations!
Absolutely, yeah.
And I'm always impressed when other people reach academic heights that I will never attain. So, man, congratulations! You deserve all the accolades that will come, I'm sure, from this book, man.
I'm just super proud of my associate's degree. So
that's right.
You should be.
I'm super happy with my liberal arts bachelor degree that my son, who's an engineer, likes to remind me all the time is a liberal arts degree, Dad. I'm like, you know what? Screw you. I got a 4.0 and I'm happy with that. So yeah, let's if you don't mind, let's just jump right in. So Theology of Consent. There was a subtitle to the book that I missed, and it's something to do with mimetic theory. So what's the subtitle of the book?
Yeah. Theology of Consent, Mimetic Theory in an Open and Relational Universe. So this is where I take René Girard's mimetic theory and I bring it together with open relational theology, and I see the sparks and the smoke fly and try to figure out kind of how they converge, but also how they diverge. They're two radically different kind of ideas. They approach the nature of reality from different spots. So it was super challenging. And as far as we know, no one has really done this before. So, which was a lot of fun to be kind of like the first to kind of bring these together. But it was also challenging because I didn't have a lot of stuff to read in order to try to draw from. So
I remember when we discussed this a year ago, I remember saying, "Oh yeah, okay," because I'm an amateur, a novice at best when it comes to open and relational theology. That's a very new thing for me, and I'm a little bit further ahead in Girard. And again, still a novice. Okay, so no, I've read him. I've read others who write about him. I understand to some degree mimetic theory, but I do think that I immediately saw, like, okay, I can see this connection between Girard and...
What did you see as the connection?
Well, the connection for me seems to be, and correct me if I'm wrong, I understand that from Girard's point of view, he doesn't subscribe to free will in the sense that, say, like Protestant evangelicals would, right? It's not from any sort of sense of predestination. It was always from a sense of, listen, you just can't escape all of the things that will come along to shape you and give you limited choices in life. And so the idea of complete autonomy is farcical, I would say, to Girard, which means to me that open relational theology, I think, tries to escape that tractor beam as well of, listen, you are predetermined to walk this path, right? This is the way things have to go. I don't know. I can see those dovetailing nicely, but in a way that creates a lot of tension, right? There's still going to be some tension there, I would think. Because where does Girard stand on, say, the sovereignty of God? Or does he even have an opinion about the sovereignty of God? Because mimetic theory is as much a discipline that doesn't necessarily have to be religious in nature, right? I mean, you can divorce mimetic theory entirely and still have those kind of concepts that shape society, that sort of anthropologically deal with human evolution and our tendencies towards violence and all these other things. So I'm not so sure that Girard would even, if he has, I've just missed it. So any sort of sense of the sovereignty of God, or would it even come into play for him?
Sovereignty in terms of like God's predetermined things and is in control,
or God being in control. God somehow being the grand puppet master, who holds all things together and guides everything. So I don't know.
Yeah,
what do you think?
It's there's a bit of tension there. Girard was a devout Catholic, so he is going to lean into that, especially the further he gets into life. But no, I can't think of anything he's written on that specifically. But your first intuition, I think, is correct in the sense that both open and relational theology and Girardian thinking is built on, relationality, interdependence, interconnectedness. Girardians would maybe call it interdividuality, which I really like that word. So you're an individual, but you're interdependent. So I pretty quickly landed on that. That was relatively easy to see that these things did converge in this kind of relational thing. And then once you kind of buy into, so to speak, relationality as the reality of the cosmos, holy cow, there's so many implications that comes out of all of that. And so I think there's some nice overlap between the two because of those things.
Yeah. Well, then wouldn't that fit you in nicely too with the mystics, who, think of guys like Richard Rohr and Thomas Merton, who so emphasize the relationality of God, even within God's self. And so there is this, this whole concept of relationality as it comes even within the Godhead. And so, what Richard Rohr would say in the beginning was the relationship. And then everything we have is birthed out of that relationship. And so that's why I've always, whether or not I ever named open relational theology, I think I've leaned towards that thinking anyway, because I never was real comfortable with the idea that, I don't know, just the sort of almost neo-Calvinist sort of hyper sovereignty, this idea that we're literally just pawns on a chessboard, almost like sort of Clash of the Titans style, right? Where the gods are just up there placing us where they want us. That just never sat well with me, And so
it's a disempowering theology.
Yeah. when I was reading a post by Thomas Ord on Facebook just a little while ago, just something he'd written about a librarian who was putting one of his books in the library. But did you see the comments? And there was a comment there that says, well, doesn't that notion of God dethrone God? And I thought Thomas Ord's response to that was like, no, it's absolutely not. How does that dethrone God? This other idea of God somehow that we could sort of minimize into this role, that dethrones, or maybe does dethrone a version of God that needs to be dethroned. So, but I don't know. I just thought that was really interesting that people, sometimes that seems to be some of that initial kickback, right? Is like, because we've become so accustomed to this idea of God a certain way that the second that is challenged, all of a sudden we're kicking God off the throne. So if somebody came to you and said something similar to that, what would your response be to this dethroning of God?
So that if someone takes initiative and does something, that they're dethroning God? Is that the question?
Yeah, or that if we claim that God, like Tom does, and I think you probably would, that there are just things God cannot do. That God is, that. So obviously the thesis of Tom's book, that God can't, meant to bristle a little bit, but anyway, yeah, just that notion that our concept of God as Almighty maybe needing to be taken down a notch or two. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah. I write quite a bit about that in Theology of Consent regarding just capital O omnipotence and the damage I think that it's done to Christianity in the West and probably everywhere, but obviously I just know it more in the West. So once you dive into a true omnipresence, it really winds up disassembling so much of this top-down hierarchical capital O omnipotence, dominating. God's in control. God's got it figured out. Blueprint, kind of a paradigm. So I very much. Of course, Tom is a good friend and was my doctor mentor. So it's been fun to hang out with him the last 3 years. And so I'm very much thinking that a part, the great privilege and honor, maybe responsibility, but I'll definitely stick with privilege and honor of being a human is to partner with the divine, and that the divine, like a good parent, we don't need to tell our kids what to do. We want to partner with them and help them figure out, what they want to do in life. And so because of that, I just superimpose that idea over my thoughts about God. And it seems to make some healthy sense, especially in this day and age where there's been so much forced upon us, religion and politics and nationalism. And I just constantly find myself just like, no, man, I want to make up my own mind, give me space. And I think most people are like that. And so I think there's a lot of really healthy things about that. And I think there's a biblical way to see that is potentially the kind of God that we have.
Yeah. I love it, man. So it might be useful at this point. It seems like we're presupposing for some folks some knowledge of René Girard and mimetic theory, and also even open and relational theology. So, would you be comfortable with like a Cliff Notes version of mimetic theory and kind of giving folks a rundown? Because sometimes we just use these words as though people automatically know what they mean. They might already be sitting there going, "What the hell is mimetic theory?" So,
right. Well, I'll do a quick rundown of open and relational. That might go a little bit quicker, and then we can do mimetic theory. Though both of them, it's easy to get off in the weeds. But open and relational has to do. I usually start with the relational concept, and that it seems like what the best way to describe the nature of reality is that everything is in relationship, interconnected from the microscopic to the macroscopic. And so this means you and I are connected in really interesting ways, and we're connected with the world. The world's connected with us. And also, God is interconnected in all the middle of that too, enmeshed, entangled, all these really great words. And because God is entangled with us and we're entangled with God, what it does is, it allows God to respond and to react, to be a God that hears and listens and really gets involved in our life. A lot of people probably don't realize that most American Christianity is built upon the idea that God, back to your idea about sovereignty, that God is impassible and immutable and can't be affected and is perfect. And so open and relational theology, stands in contrast to all that. and is saying, no, actually, there's a way to read the Bible. Well, first of all, there's a way to read the Bible to believe that God is perfectly, unaffected and not changing. I just don't think it's a healthy way to read it. And so when you factor in the idea that everything is in relationship, including God with us, that God can be influenced, like a good parent is influenced when their kid experiences something. I mean, how much more so than with the divine and us? And so God can, in that sense, be changed and be affected. That doesn't mean that God has the essence of who they are changed, and we can get into talking about more of that if we want. But so the relationality piece means that God can truly interact, which I think is a biblical thing. And then B, what it also means is that, which leads to the second part, the open part, it means that the future is not predetermined. So God doesn't necessarily know exactly how everything's going to play out, because if you're truly in relationship, you don't know how tomorrow's going to go. I mean, you might have some good guesses, and I assume the divine has some better guesses even than I do. But, if I know what's going to happen, then there's no reason for faith. There's no reason for trust. And, we don't describe relationships, earthly relationships to be positive or healthy if the other person, knew everything that was going to happen like a robot before it happened. So we don't do that either, with the divine. So that's open and relational in a nutshell. And it's really built around relationality. And there's about 1 billion, sub things to all of that. But before we go on to mimetic theory, or as some would say, mimetic theory, I don't know. I always say mimetic, but, your medic, my medic, everyone's
your
medic.
Our medic theory. Am I safe in assuming then, though, even with, so obviously open and relational theology is going to be a large category, that there are people within those streams that disagree with each other, obviously, who might not go as far as some others, who might push back. Because I remember talking to, I think even Mark Karras about, okay, well then does this call into question even the omniscience of God? Because if we're going to make the audacious statement that God can't do certain things, then there are things that maybe God can't know, which leaves that open-endedness of things. And maybe God, maybe the divine can know every possible permutation, but the choice is squarely on you. And so therefore have a hard time understanding of a concept of God that allows for free will and then is still controlling.
Well,
so go ahead, John.
I was just going to say, I mean, you enter the world of nihilism if you go down the trail that says that God knows everything, because at that point, what's the point, right? There's no point in you doing or caring about anything, because if God knows the outcome of everything, then you're just like, fuck it. I'm just going to do whatever the hell I want, because God already has a plan, and whatever mess ups or destructive behavior I have brought to this world, or to me, or to my family, or to whatever, was already predetermined. God already knows all this. And so you have this whole like nihilist idea that it doesn't matter anymore, right? Because God knows all of this. And so you live in a world where I'm just going to do whatever the hell I want, which is, it's a weird place to be, right? Because you have like within like the hyper grace movement, you have people saying, well, if you don't believe in the ultimate, like sin is a problem, then you become a person who doesn't care. But at the same time, if you believe that God is in control of everything, then what's the point, right?
Yeah.
Well, I think it's interesting too, because even people who do believe that God is in control of everything, they still get up every day like we all do, and they have to make decisions. They don't necessarily live like God is in control of everything. They make choices, and they make choices based on value and possibility and potential. So At the end of the day, like for me, it kind of just gets to be like, it's pointless. We don't, none of us live that way anyhow.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's important to consider. And I think it's problematic. And I think it's a healthier way to read the text, to read scripture, and to approach life with the sense that, no, my choices matter. It doesn't mean that I have like carte blanche. I can do anything I want every single day. I don't think any of us necessarily believe that. There's a lot of systems and conditions that we all have to live within and under. But there's still always agency. There's always still a possibility,
right?
To make certain choices.
And then that can segue us into mimetic theory, which sort of deals with that issue of agency, right? And so sort of deals with, especially for Girard, and I'll just say this before I let you go, but so much of what Girard posits is happening on a subconscious level, right? And so there's all this happening, although we're not necessarily consciously aware that we're doing this. So anyway, but mimetic theory in a nutshell, that's maybe a harder task.
Maybe. Also, I should say too, to answer your other question, there is definitely some disagreement within open relational theology about how some of these things play out. I would say that if you have a choice between me and Mark Karras, always go with Mark. So that's a rule.
Mark's a good dude, man. Right, but you sound like you're kind of cut from the same cloth. I mean, I see him and Tom as being. We've interviewed both of them, and they are different. I don't think they agree on everything, and I love that. They're very respectful of one another, which I also love. I felt like Mark, and correct me if I'm wrong in my sense about Mark. Mark tries to stay within the framework, I think, sometimes of Christianity a little bit more. I think Tom almost doesn't care too much. Like, I'm going to go where it leads me. Mark was able for me to rescue the concept of petitionary prayer. Like it was about to go on the chopping block. And Mark showed me in Divine Echoes a way to go, no, okay, there's utility here. There is agency here, and there is a way to participate with the divine. And that was very, very, very helpful. And I don't know where Tom, we didn't really get on that subject too much with Tom, but I mean, if it's between me, Mark, and Tom, you definitely have to go with Tom. So, I mean, there you go. So you're solidly in third place.
Yeah. I'm even further than that. That's just the only names you've mentioned so far.
And Greg Boyd gets like a distant fourth. I'm not even sure. Is Greg Boyd solidly in the open relational camp, or is he just kind of a hanger on?
He doesn't want to be. He doesn't want to be in any camp, does he? He doesn't even know. Yeah. What does Greg know?
I don't know. He writes big books, man.
He does.
I still have Death of the Warrior God on my bookshelf that I've about a third way through, and I'm like, I applaud your effort, dude. But God, that's two volumes of massiveness. But
in my world, I would lean.
I still want Greg on the show, John. Be nice.
Okay. I was just going to say, in my world, I definitely lean toward Tom. That's definitely. I mean, he's given me a lot of tools put into my tool belt on what God can and can't do, right? And that's kind of where I sit, I think, right now. Now, that's right now. A year from now, who the hell knows? But that's where I am right now.
Well, hell, who knows what Tom will think in a year?
Yeah. Right. I mean, to put yourself into the world of God is not in control. Really opens you up to a lot of questions. That are going to be thrown at you. Like, well, if God is not in control, then it's fill in the blank. Then what about this? What about this? What about this? What about this? And there's so many things that people will throw at you. If God is not in control, then how do we deal with, right? And I think Tom does a really good job. And honestly, I think Mark Karras does too on, and I'm assuming you do too, with this idea that if God is not in control, then there is a part for us to play, right? We are not innocent bystanders in any of this. Within the world of open theism, we are not people who stand by as God controls and shapes the world and moves things forward. We are ultimately part of this plan. We are. That's not even the right word. Plan is not the right word.
Yeah, but
we can affect and control just by our nature of caring and being a loving connection to other humans, how this moves forward, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's the idea.
Right, so I've cut you off twice, man. I'm sorry. So, just with my there's so much to talk about, man. Okay. So the quick rundown with mimetic theory is
sure. Well, it's not, it's not sequential, but we can kind of talk about it in that way to give us an idea. And yeah, your intuition is correct in the sense that it's built on, I think you said something like this, but it's built on unconscious desire, basically,
desire,
or subconscious. The whole thing is about desire and the reality that our desires are mediated by the other person. So no one really exactly knows what they want or what they desire. Our entire marketing industry is built upon this. You know, they don't show you, the soft drink that you want to drink. They show you the soft drink that the model, drinks. And then, so your desires are then influenced by their desires. Interestingly enough, that model goes home at night and, he or she is also having their desires mediated by someone else. And so it's just this never ending process. So the first piece basically is built on desire, and also something that I think is often overlooked is this idea that we are very aware of what the other person desires because of our own lack, because of our own insecurities and anxieties. That other person kind of pops out against the dark. It's like this bright light against the dark contrast of our own lack, to use a psychoanalytic or a philosophical phrase. And so because we're aware of, our shortcomings, we look at that model and we think, oh gosh, they kind of have it together. They have, to use a Girardian phrase, metaphysical autonomy. They are put together. They don't have any lack. And so we want what they want. And so then we begin to imitate them, which is the second piece, if we're explaining it this way. Desire goes to imitation. And then when we imitate them, they strangely notice the attention that we give it. And so they begin to imitate us. And so now we're both reaching for a particular thing. That particular thing, it's arbitrary. Doesn't really matter what that thing is. It could be the guy or the girl, or it could be a degree, or it could be a car, or again, it could be the soft drink, or any number of things. That's basically irrelevant. The point is as I reach for that, they reach for that. And then there's this kind of oscillation, this reciprocation of imitating each other over and over. And we're becoming more and more like each other. So the differentiation is breaking down. And so Girard begins to unpack that and show how, because of that, and again, our own awareness of our own lack and our own being motivated by scarcity rather than abundance, which humans are really good at that, myself included. We tend to think we got to get that thing before they get it so we can make it whole. Otherwise, they'll get it and they'll be whole and we won't. We'll be left out. And so conflict grows, the antagonism grows. And then, so we got desire, imitation, conflict. And the fourth piece is the piece that, most people are, or at least some people are familiar with regard to mimetic theory. And that is the scapegoating piece. So Girard basically says, this conflict grows and grows until these two people who are now, they're not just two people, because the people always draw in their community with them. So families or townsfolk or villagers or churches or denominations or political alliances, whatever the case. So these people and these people are now facing each other, and they're either going to descend into chaos, which has certainly happened. But what Girard discovered was that humanity developed this really ingenious way to deal with all their animosity and their antagonism. And that is at the last moment or at some moment, myself and my opponent agree together through a strange series of whatever. I'm not even sure how it always takes place, but we agree together to turn and point our finger at the scapegoat. And we offload, it's like this psychological projection, but it's psycho-spiritual, this projection onto the back of someone else who is usually a bit different than us. Doesn't work very well if it's not someone just like us. And so then I get to build unity with my opponent and then scapegoat that other person. So Girard talks about unanimity -1. So it's a power move to get rid of someone. And it's super fascinating because it works. The tension that we've had can be dissipated. I think the word is catharsis, probably, that kind of gets at it the best. And there's a sense of peace that can sweep over the crowd. So there's one other important piece to that, but that's the flow so far: desire, imitation, conflict, scapegoating. Right.
And I love that. I mean, Gerard points out places in Scripture where we see this play out, right? And there's lots of these places. But I think the most stark is Pilate and Herod. You know, and the Bible says on this day they became friends. Right? The day that they decided that they would pour out they would vent, I guess, the sort of escape valve of simmering conflict would all be vented on the back of Jesus. All right. If not peace, then stasis, at least some sort of, hey, let's just get back to a level playing field. And so, yeah, some sort of order. And we do that. And then, but Gerard also points out that Jesus is a lousy scapegoat because he doesn't stay dead. So, you know, he's supposed to, we're supposed to plow under the scapegoat, never hear from them again. They're just supposed to be just like the literal scapegoat within Judaism, right? It's supposed to be driven off into the wilderness and, you know, all the sins of the people placed on the scapegoat and it's driven out and you don't ever see that thing again. And Jesus is like, hey, I'm back. And so I do like that idea because I see within mimetic theory, at least there is the potential to break that cycle, right? It's not hopeless. It's not, hey, we're all just locked in this never ending repeating pattern. Now we have been given some ideas about how we could break those cycles of violence and break those cycles. So I think that's interesting. But what was that other piece then that we're missing? So we have the desire, the imitation. We have this conflict, inevitable simmering conflict, right? Which has to be dealt with. It gets dealt with through a scapegoat typically. And then obviously lather, rinse, repeat. We just do the same thing over and over again. But
well, and it should be mentioned too. So Jesus does show back up, but the point is it's not just that he shows back up, but he shows back up, bringing peace.
Right.
And so he's refusing to re-engage the scapegoating. You know, he's refusing to show back up in battle fatigues and rally the troops to now go scapegoat the Romans or the Jews, for scapegoating him. And it's like this most brilliant, beautiful, gracious move. That is, I think, what we are called to do. I think we're invited into this movement of love to, be a part of this process because you are going to be scapegoated, you are going to be hurt, you are going to be ostracized, but then to engage with grace in order that you don't get caught up in the mimetic cycle. And frankly, there's a ton of that happening in the deconstructing movement. And I don't blame people because some people have been really hurt. I mean, frankly, I've been really hurt by certain crazy things that the church has done to me. So it's challenging, but I think the goal at that point is to figure out a way to name the injustice and draw boundary lines, but do it in a gracious way.
What is it that Shane Claiborne wrote in his book, The Liturgy for Ordinary Radicals? He says something to the effect of that real justice is basically finding the third way between fight or flight, right? It's finding the third way that allows us to have justice without becoming perpetrators of injustice. And I'm paraphrasing what he said, but I see that playing out where within the deconstruction movement, one of the things that I'll plug my forthcoming book at some point, but one of the things that I try very hard throughout this book that I write about deconstruction is to caution against this kind of cynicism, you know, that becomes toxic, right? I mean, and to remember that inside of all of these systems, that we legitimately have issues with and that we legitimately should have, you know, should take issue with, that there are human beings inside of those things who are every bit as victimized as we were by those same systems. And so, it's too easy, I think. It's too easy to become cynical and assume everyone has nefarious motives and that they're all out to get you. And we do exactly what you just said is we've experienced that scapegoating. And then sometimes the second we get a chance to do it to somebody else, we go, yeah, my turn, right? And rather than following Jesus's model of being subversive and saying, no, I'm not going to play in those games, right? So that's the model that I think that Jesus shows. I think exactly right.
Following that, so, you know, you fast forward to where we are now with social media, right? It's super easy to scapegoat different groups within any political ideology or religious ideology. And what we've done is we have divorced ourselves of this, I don't even know what to call it. I mean, this level of hate towards certain groups of people, but then we then isolate our version of hate towards a very specific group of people that differ from us, regardless of that's who we were, say, 6 months ago, a year ago, right? And so we sit in this world where we are better than them because we have moved away from that, but we don't give them the grace or I'm not saying they deserve it because I don't know where they are, right? Like they don't know where I am. But as we move away from these ideas of hurtful and hateful speech, is it important to then look at these groups that we then scapegoat? Because, I mean, aren't we doing the same thing in a weird way?
Yeah, we can. I think that's a part of what all three of us are saying. That's the hard challenge, is to be able to name the injustice of what has taken place, but to do it in a way that we are not antagonizing the beast, so to speak. You know, Nietzsche said, beware when you fight the monster that you don't become the monster. And I think we see that a lot. The challenging thing is that I'm a white, straight, male, American, relatively affluent guy. And so, I've noticed this a lot of times when I'm in an LGBTQ crowd, I kind of have to be careful about how I say that because I haven't been manipulated, coerced, hurt, abused in some of the ways they have. When I'm with my African American friends, very much same thing. Some of them are like, you know, to hell with that. I'm going to stand up for what I believe. And I don't really blame them at that point. I think my job at that point is to try to, you know, just to extend grace and to be the best friend that I can be. But 100%, I think that's what's going on. Jesus doesn't just show back up. He shows up peacefully, and which is interesting too, because the end of the New Testament writings, we have that infamous Revelation book, which has, you know, infamously been interpreted in apocalyptic, violent ways. But Jesus there is the Lamb, and the point is the return of Christ, whatever that is not marked by bloodshed and violence. And now there might be bloodshed and violence, but it's not because God needs it to be. That would be like, you know, Jesus being the Prince of Peace while he was here, then leaving for a while, and then coming back and being like, you know what? I changed my mind. It was a bad idea. This time around, we're going to kick butt, take names. You know, it's silly when you look at it that way. So it's peace all the way through. It's love. It's consent all the way through. It's just, this is a completely different way to look at power. It disassembles and reassembles power.
I don't know why this keeps coming up and it keeps like popping up in my brain, but speaking of like how we have to acknowledge what our LGBTQIA plus community is going through, our siblings are going through, or our BIPOC siblings are going through. We had recently, well, not recently anymore, it's been a while ago, we had a conversation with Christina Cleveland about her book, God is a Black Woman. And one of the first comments I made to her, I think it's prior to us recording, but I told her your book was it was hard for me to read. And she says, good, it wasn't meant for you. And that's one of those things. It's like, yeah, I mean, and it was like a moment of like, oh shit. Yeah, I have to give authority where authority is to people that don't look like me and sound like me, that they are not talking to me. They are talking to people that look and sound and talk like them. And for me to be like, hey, I don't understand your book, like, good, it wasn't meant for you. It wasn't written for you. But as a white, middle-aged, heterosexual male, I automatically assume that everything is written for me to understand. And that's a position that a lot of us take. And it's breaking down that ideology, right? And breaking down this idea that not everything that needs to be written, spoken, talked about is meant for me. And then that allows us to say, okay, I'm going to take a back seat to this as my siblings of color or my siblings that are in the LGBTQIA plus community, reach out to their community. And it's time for me to take a back seat. And that fits within Girard, that fits within the open theism, that sometimes my voice isn't the voice that needs to move this forward, right?
Yeah, it's a very relational way to approach it, and I think an important way. And there's lowercase p power in all of that, in the ability to be able to back off of that. And I think I'm pretty confident that that's what a lot of white American Christians are being invited into, is just this: take a breath, back up, give everyone space. It's not all about you. If you don't understand it, fine, you just don't understand it, but you can still lean into grace and space, because this is a relational cosmos. This is not a hierarchy dominated, top down kind of a thing. And it's challenging at times, but I think it's a really beautiful invitation for us.
So we've got again, for those of you listening, there's a lot more to all of this. Jonathan's given us a very skeletonized view. You can get really deep into the weeds. I've read multiple Girard books. They're not easy. It might be easier to start with somebody who writes about Girard. Be like, okay, Girard for Dummies starts over here. I think the first book I ever read, I don't know if you know who Michael Hardin is, but I was good friends with Michael Hardin back in the day. And I jumped headfirst. He had this Facebook group that was, for a little while, was very dynamic, very interesting. And so that was my first foray into any of this. And so I immediately went out and bought The Sacred and the Violet. I bought, I See Satan Fall Like Lightning. I see, so I
saw these up here.
So good, but difficult. And, presupposes a lot of, there's a lot of stuff that you kind of have to go in knowing a little bit of, you just can't go in. Anyway, so I found books like Matt DiStefano's book, From the Blood of Abel, to be a very good resource to kind of, hey, let's make this somewhat more accessible.
What we need? We need a book called Theology of Consent, Mimetic Theory in an Open and Relational Universe. And so that way people can ease into this.
Yeah. And I think so. And I love, so walk me through this then. So we have these two pieces. We have, mimetic theory. We have open and relational theology. And what's their point of convergence in your mind? I mean, I sort of give you what I thought might be the case, but give me the real deal.
Well, and also to answer your other question, the last piece that sometimes is overlooked, you kind of already said it, the rinse and repeat: desire, imitation, conflict, scapegoating. And then the conflict always comes back up because it's a fake kind of piece. And
right.
So what Girard says is that humanity figured out a way to repeat and to ritualize. And that's religion is formed out of all that.
And
right.
Which is how we can sacralize violence, right?
Yeah. And what's really interesting with that is that, a lot of times you'll hear people say, well, religion just inspires violence, which I think there probably is some truth to that. I understand the sentiment, but it probably doesn't go deep enough. If you're Girardian, you say, actually, no, violence inspires religion. So it's because we never dealt with our violence in the first place. We never dealt with our insecurity and our lack, and we just keep projecting it onto the other person and then scapegoating over and over and over. We built all these layers. What if you went back to the beginning and you just said, you know what? Yeah, you got anxiety, insecurity, you have lack, but God loves you. God's with you. God's not separate. It's a relational cosmos. So then anthropologically, you could say, right? Then human beings invented religion to institutionalize their violence that they don't want to deal with, give it a context, right? Give it a structure, give it reason. Actually, Girard would say something like religion was invented to manage the violence,
right?
To put limits around it. So it's not that they don't want to deal with it. Subconsciously, subconsciously we know it's a huge problem. So the scapegoating mechanism gives us a way to deal with it and to offload our problems onto the oppressed, onto the victim. And so we victimize others. When Jesus steps in as the victim, it completely subverts the whole thing. And, we've just been a mess. We didn't get it. We've been a mess still for a couple thousand years and we still are, because we, it's too vulnerable to pay too much attention to the oppressed. So yeah, it's really cool. And so then to try to bring that together with open relational was super challenging. Basically I tried to bring it around there's this coming together on the relational piece, like we already talked about. So that seemed to kind of make sense. There was some divergence around, like, is scapegoating, is that really the nature of reality? Is humanity always been a scapegoating species? So that was really interesting, because when I dug into that, what I realized was that, well, scapegoating probably is as old as Cain and Abel, but it's not necessarily as old as humanity. So what I think is, and you kind of have to follow this a little bit, but it seems like scapegoating emerges around the time that something like the fall would have taken place. And I don't prescribe to an actual literal fall, like Adam and Eve, literally sinned, and then because of that, injustice or sin or pain entered the world. But there was a time period around which stories like that began to emerge. And it would have been the time period when humanity moved. This is kind of nerdy, sorry. But when humanity moved from hunter-gatherers to agrarian society. So in that move, for the first time in history, humanity began, we began to have people who were like land barons or lords or people who owned large tracts of property that then began to use others to farm their land. And so there was this inequity, this unequal way that people were being compensated, and the owners were getting more of the share, and then people were being overworked. So it's this whole transition from hunter-gatherer to agrarian is around the time that something like the fall could have happened with something like an Adam and Eve. I can't remember her Hebrew name. And I find that to be really interesting. So previous to that, what evolutionary biologists, and I get into this just a little bit in my book, not deeply, but what certain evolutionary biologists and cultural anthropologists and archaeologists are saying is that previous to that, we came together. I'm saying we loosely. This would have been, like Homo sapiens 100,000 years ago. We weren't inspired so much by competition. We were inspired more by cooperation. And I found that to be really, really interesting. And when I first began to discover that, I thought, oh, well, this kind of debunks Girardian stuff. And what I realized after a while is, no, not necessarily. What Girard is saying is, no, that this all begins to happen with Adam and Eve, and then Cain and Abel. Cain, kills his brother, doesn't care when God comes looking for him. Where's my brother? Am I my brother's keeper? Cain ends up moving east of Eden and founding the first civilization upon murder and violence. So that seems to be a kind of a really interesting time period. And since then, we've basically been messed up. We're all kind of living downstream from that. But it doesn't necessarily mean that previous to that, we were driven by desire and acquisitive, mimetic desire and violence as much as happened. And I don't know if anyone even cares about that.
No, but that's as you're talking, it's my brain's moving. So you have to excuse the smoke that you can see coming from my ears. I'm like, oh, wait a minute. So it sounds like as we move from nomadic sort of, hunter-gatherer people, and we've moved more towards this agrarian society that is more now based on competition, right? That now that scarcity things comes into play or comes into focus. So now you don't have an abundance of, hey, I can go here or I can go there. And there's no lack of resources. So there's really no need to compete. We can cooperate. And then once we found, the first civilizations where people now begin to have control over their environment, and they start to actually control the products. And so then now scarcity can come into play. Not so much that we are, I think it was Brueggemann who talks about the lie of scarcity, where he talks about, listen, there is no scarcity really. But when people have come in, land barons have come in and then hoarded everything to control it and then dole it out as they see fit, they've created scarcity, which then creates competition.
Right. Which creates competition. And then also the worker, the land worker is seeing how that other person is living. They're seeing their own anxiety and their own lack. And
desire can become envy.
Desire, yep. Jealousy turns into envy, and this lights the fire of the whole scapegoating mechanism. So it kind of makes sense. So that was kind of cool to see that. So open and relational, open and relational has less to say about, depending on who you read, but less to say about how sin entered the world or what sin is. It will want to be more like maybe they don't necessarily always use this language, but maybe like original blessing that leads, then allows sin to form. But honestly, it's not that language. It's more like original potentiality that then that allows for either blessing or cursing or, whatever words you want to use. So it all kind of fit. It was like, oh yeah, that I see mimetic theory fitting into that. So it's kind of cool.
Yeah. So then this theology of consent says what? Because I know what I think it goes, but again, I'm asking you for large brushstrokes here. But so the theology, who is the one giving consent? It was the one, like sort of, I guess, working inside of consent. Is it God consenting to our will, and vice versa to some degree, or how does that play out?
Yeah, it's a really interesting and challenging idea. The idea that I think God is love, and that if God is love, the fundamental characteristic of love is consent, which is it's not a real common phrase. So to talk about this kind of stuff can make people nervous.
Well, let's make them nervous. Go crazy.
Yeah, for sure. Trust me, I've been nervous for several years now. So,
I love it.
Simone Weil wrote an essay 100 years ago, so actually called The Theology of Consent. I figured that out late into this
I've got
project.
A copy on my nightstand.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
She's great. Yeah.
She's awesome. So, and she's got this line, it's either there or in Gravity and Grace, I don't remember where, like that God does no violence to secondary causes in accomplishment of his means. So in other words, God's not interested in like getting into ethical, moral games where he or she uses other people or does violence to other people in order to get something else done right,
Right.
That God is constantly working in and amongst, and that love is actually infused within the order of things, within the nature of things.
Wow.
And that consent is constantly working, and it makes it feel as if love is not powerful. But what it does is it requires you, or maybe invites you, to reframe your definitions of what power is. Yeah. And so open and relational theology will constantly want to reframe power around relational power versus authoritative power. And there's a difference. Like when I think about the difference between my nation's largest aircraft carrier, or I think about the love that I have for my daughter. Like one is authoritative power, one is relational power. And what I suspect is, as strong as that aircraft carrier is and all that it symbolizes and all that it means, what I suspect is that love is even stronger and will outlast all of that and is more sustainable, it's more ecological, it will be around forever. The authoritative power, it's just a different way of looking at it. And I think Girardians are interested in that too. They don't use that same language, but they're very interested in how power dynamics and how it plays out and who's asking who to sacrifice and why, and the role of consent. And so I pretty quickly landed on that, like being a linchpin between these two super important paradigms.
Yeah, I mean, it sort of strikes me as reminiscent of even Luther's sort of motifs of left-handed and right-handed power, right? Where that left-handed power, Jesus represents more left-handed power. He's not, which is why I think I lean towards sort of this open relational theology where God's not controlling in an authoritative way. He is this left-handed power, which is the power of consent, which looks to all the world like weakness, but is actually very, very strong. And then this power that we project that seeks to coerce and to manipulate and to force people is actually weakness projected in some sort of caricature of power, right? And so I love it. I actually was reading through, I've read through Brad Jersak's book, More Christ-Like God, more times than I can think of. And he's got a section in there about consent. And I was like, and I know how much he loves Simone Weil, and had actually translated one of her works, and is very, very, very conversant in her writing. But so I know that's played a big influence on him as well. I love it. We had Brad on I guess it's been about a year now, hasn't it, John? It's been too long. And I kind of put him on the spot about open and relational theology. And he's not there. Although he doesn't have any particular bone of contention. He's just very orthodox. And so there's certain places he's not willing, at least now. He's like, well, I can't quite go there. I totally get what they're saying. I respect what they're saying. He's like, I know Tom. I get, so, which is, correct me if I'm wrong. It seems like within these circles anyway, I guess it can get contentious at times, but what I have seen is less. And I'm sure there's always going to be an outlier, somebody who can be, an asshole and really contentious about their point of view. But it does seem to be a very collaborative, sort of cooperative world you live in.
Well, once you buy into the idea that things are open, it doesn't have to go one particular way. And once you buy into the other idea that it's all relational, your ideas come about because of other people's ideas, and my ideas come about because of, we're so interconnected, it's impossible to pull it all apart. So yeah, the very essence of that lends itself towards people being way less dogmatic, which is great. It's completely opposite of the way I grew up. So it's and it's also challenging to lead a faith community at times, because, we've all been programmed to really to lead by telling people what we're against rather than for what we're for. It's easier to draw up lines and, as we've been talking about, to scapegoat the other and to talk about ourselves as over against the other. So it's a bit discombobulating because of all that. But I love that whole piece of it, that the graciousness of it seems to be a little bit more like Jesus than some of the other.
I think so. That's, again, in my little snapshots that I've seen. I don't roll in any highbrow circles like y'all do.
Yeah, and actually, right. No, actually, I think Open and Relational Camp was doing really well until I started getting into it, and now I think I'm importing a bunch of mimetic dysfunction, and I'm probably screwed the whole thing up.
Or have you injected it with something new and vital and like, oh my gosh, okay, we hadn't considered how this piece might work, like might complement what we've. I can't wait to read your dissertation in your book, because I'm fascinated by how those two things will work together. And again, I have an inkling of how that might work, but I'm sure you're much more articulate in your writing than I am in my mumblings. But I've always been a big, for a very long time, I've been very, very interested in Girard, and I've looked for ways. Maybe this has been your experience too. There's times when it's so theoretical almost, it's hard to find application. And this seems like it might be a good way to bring some rubber meets the road type of stuff to some concepts that at times just seem to be academic. Okay, well, that's all well and good. I had this argument with my dad 8 or 9 years ago where we're talking about, I'm just excited about it. I'm trying to explain it. And he's like, okay, yeah, but so what? I'm like, what do you mean, so what? This changes everything. He's like, well, how? And I'm like, well, I don't know. It just does, so. And I had to admit, walking away from that conversation, like, yeah, but he's got a point. A lot of this is a great mental exercise. And there are times when you go, okay, yeah, but what does this actually do for us? What's the practical side of this for us? And I am struck by what I think your writing might do, which is to maybe concretize some of this in a way that helps us to actually make some practical use of it. And I don't know. I'm not sure if that was your intention or if it was just a cool idea to see if you can get those two things to, peanut butter and chocolate to go together, man. Be like, holy shit, Reese's. That's amazing.
Exactly. Well, yeah. I can't say that my initial motivation was to try to come up with concrete examples necessarily, but I think there is a byproduct of some of that is happening, because I'm trying to bring these things together and see how they, again, interact, and sometimes it's not very graceful. And so to try to work through all of that and to see what each of them is saying, I'd like to think it would be helpful for people. And it's slightly academic. It's certainly more academic than anything I've written in the past, but I don't think it's so much so that that people will be put off. And both paradigms are so interesting. I've never ever had a conversation. Actually, I don't think about either one of these concepts where people were just like, that they were just bored or they didn't want. Right, I mean, they might have been bored with me. Or got
but the concepts were intriguing, right?
But mimetic theory, man, it blows up your mind. And open and relational stuff, I mean, it blows up your whole concepts of from the smallest to the biggest. So it's really, really great stuff. I'm just scratching the surface. And again, it appears I'm like one of the first to kind of do it in this way. So hopefully others will take it and run with it.
Yeah, I don't know if this was the same for you. Both those concepts for me was this paradigm of like, okay, once you see it, you can't unsee it. And so like my first little introduction to mimetic theory at all, then I'm like, oh shoot. Oh, okay. Now I see this in operation everywhere. I see it all. So, and the same thing happened with open relational theology. All of a sudden I'm like, oh, this touches on everything. I mean, this isn't just limited to one thing. So you just can't unsee it. And so, but one thing I noticed about, just to throw a little shade on the Girardians a little bit, because there's such a much more established camp, it seems like, and they've been around Girard's been doing his work for years, and they are, they're a disparate group of people. There are some that are, not religious at all, and some that are very religious, and some that, I have been in and out of several, especially Facebook groups, that get contentious. I mean, it seems like they need an interjection of relational theology, if nothing else, to remind them that, listen, all of this stuff is good and interesting. But when you start, trashing your relationships over disagreements, you're missing an integral part of this. So I can see you infusing some humanity back into the otherwise just wholly academic stuff and saying, listen, there's this component too, which I think would be super useful.
Well, yeah, and I've come to the Girardian side through the open and relational theology. So I wasn't in the Girardian camp prior to being in the open relational camp. So I definitely see where they work well together. I think the open theism definitely gives you a broader scope to start from. And that's because that's where I started from. I can see where maybe people who start from the Girardian side is like, well, yeah, but you need to get into all this academic stuff first. But for me, the open relational theology really gave me a really nice foothold into Girardian theology, or Girardian thought, I guess I should say. So for me, it was an easier step. So I'm really looking forward to sharing what you're bringing to the world of bringing these two together. And I think it's going to be something that's going to be really important to people who are trying to figure out this connection between these two. And I really, really am excited about it.
Yeah. Dude, I'm psyched. Yeah. I can't wait. I'm a nerd. I'm a nerd out with you when I nerd out with this book. So I can't wait.
Let's do it.
All right. Cool. Hey, man, let's not have it be another year before we, are you still podcasting, really? By the way?
I do. Okay, cool. I hit these kind of short seasons, and like right now I'm doing something where I took a bunch of questions that young people had emailed me or Facebooked me, and I'm running them through an open relational and mimetic theory filter.
Wow.
And
cool.
I'm trying to give response to all these things. So, someone asks about meaning making, or, who am I? What does it even matter? So I try to think, okay, what do all these people think? And so I'm doing that right now, and that's been fun.
Yeah, very cool. Well, like I said,
I don't have two hosts. I'm not that cool.
That's what I'm saying. If you had two, you could put out something once a week. You know what I'm saying? But I don't even know. The Heretic Happy Hour only puts out one every 2 weeks. They're slacking, John.
There's too many.
I've shared the Heretic Happy Hour twice now in this episode. And Matt, if you're listening, Keith, come on, man.
I feel a lot of mimetic desire.
I know, really.
There is. Yeah. There is. We didn't even know we wanted what they had until we saw that they had it. And then when we wanted it, it reinforced the value of what they. So yeah, we've got a simmering conflict. I think Jason's going to be our scapegoat.
Oh, is it? Oh, okay. Okay.
I don't know. Someone's going to have to go.
Someone's got to do it.
It's going to be good, man.
It's going to be us.
It's going to be, yeah. It usually is the weaker of the three. So, but no, it's awesome, man. There's like I said, so much good stuff, so much good ground to be covered there. So, don't forget, the book is available. Theology of Consent, Jonathan J. Foster, right? Is it under, because there's a couple Jonathan Fosters on Amazon. You got to be careful. You end up with some book about farming or something. But
it's probably better writing. But yeah, I'm Jonathan J. Foster.
Jonathan J. Foster, and you're gonna want to pick this up. You're gonna want to nerd out a little bit. Man, it's just digging into all this stuff. It's amazing, and we'll link to all your stuff in the show notes. Make sure people can access you in whatever ways are best. And man, we just appreciate you coming on and spending the time with us. Thank you so much.
For sure.
Absolutely. I really appreciate you having me. And it'll be fun to interact with folks about all of this.
Thank you for listening to This Is Not Church. Be sure to rate and review the podcast on your platform of choice. If you would like to partner with us, visit patreon.com/thisisnotchurch, where you will receive exclusive content such as early access to episodes, videos of upcoming episodes, and live Q&A sessions. Be sure to check out our Facebook group or follow us on Twitter and Instagram. All the links are in the show notes. We'll be back soon with another episode.